The United States is proposing an end to Russia's war against Ukraine by early summer, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said during a briefing with reporters. He noted that the US may pressure both sides to follow this timeline. Zelensky added that domestic issues in the United States will become even more important for American negotiators in the coming months. The president emphasized that it is important for Ukraine that the US remains engaged in the negotiation process, and it is also in Russia's interest to have the Americans at the negotiation table.
As for the Americans, their priority will likely simply be Congress, and we understand that they will devote most of their time to domestic processes, elections, and shifts in public opinion. For them, the elections are certainly more important. In principle, we have long proposed to the American side to have a clear sequence plan, so that everyone understands what each party is aiming for, at what moment, and at which stages. This is to prevent the war from dragging on, because we truly want to end the war and guarantee security.
The fate of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, also remains a complex issue. A Reuters source reported that Russia rejected a US proposal under which Washington would control the plant and distribute its electricity between Russia and Ukraine. According to the source, Moscow insists on controlling the plant itself and offers Ukraine electricity at a low price, which Kyiv finds unacceptable. President Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed this information. Meanwhile, Reuters, citing its own resources, reports that during the negotiations on ending the war between Ukraine and Russia, the possibility of signing a peace agreement as early as March and holding elections in Ukraine in May was discussed. However, some sources familiar with the talks describe this timeline as unrealistic. They say the schedule is likely to be pushed back due to the lack of agreement on key territorial issues. Reuters journalists report that two key issues remain unresolved in the peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine: the Donbas region and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Russia insists on controlling the entire Donbas as a part of any potential peace settlement. Ukraine considers this demand unacceptable, although officials in Kyiv have expressed willingness to explore creative solutions such as demilitarized zone or a free trade zone. President Volodymyr Zelensky noted that the territorial issue was not resolved during the talks in Abu Dhabi.
Difficult issues remain difficult. Ukraine has once again reaffirmed its positions regarding the Donbass. We stand where we stand. In our view, this is the fairest and most reliable model for a ceasefire at present. No common understanding has been reached yet regarding the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. All parties recognize that the issue of the plant must be addressed together with the questions of the dam's restoration, water use, and the overall ecosystem of the area.
He also noted that the Russian delegation's willingness at the Abu Dhabi talks to discuss the creation of a free economic zone in Donbas, the future monitoring of a ceasefire, and other key issues represents a new rhetoric in the negotiation process. Previously, when Vladimir Medinsky led the Russian delegation, they focused more on historical lectures. Zelensky reiterated that territorial issues should be resolved at the level of the leaders of Ukraine, the United States, and Russia. He also confirmed his readiness for such talks.
For the first time, the parties discussed that the most difficult issues will likely be brought to a tripartite meeting of leaders. Likely. But this will require some preparatory elements. It is important that discussions of this format are part of the dialogue.
According to Reuters journalist, US and Ukrainian delegations are discussing a framework under which any agreement would be put to a referendum for Ukrainian voters. At the same time, they would also vote in national elections, 5 sources speaking on conditions of anonymity said. During recent meetings in Abu Dhabi and Miami, the US negotiating team told their Ukrainian counterparts that it would be desirable to hold the vote as soon as possible, 3 sources said. US negotiators also noted that with the upcoming midterm elections in November, President Donald Trump is likely to focus more on domestic issues. This means senior US officials would have less time and political bandwidth to reach a peace deal, two sources said. They also added that the possibility of holding national elections and a referendum in May was discussed. However, several sources familiar with the talks described the proposed US timeline as unrealistic. According to Ukrainian electoral authorities, organizing elections under current conditions would take about 6 months. The Americans are in a hurry, one source said, adding that while the vote could theoretically be organized in less than 6 months, it would still require a significant timeline. Holding the elections would require legislative changes as voting is prohibited under martial law in Ukraine. In addition, it would be costly. Ukraine insists on a ceasefire for the entire election period to protect the integrity of the referendum and notes that the Kremlin has a history of violating ceasefire agreements, one source said. At the Abu Dhabi talks, the United States once again proposed an energy ceasefire. Russia has not yet responded to the proposal. President Volodymyr Zelensky said the US representatives in Abu Dhabi once again proposed an energy ceasefire. Ukraine agreed, but Russia has not yet given its consent. The president told journalists that Russia typically responds to such initiatives only after returning home. Additionally, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha told Reuters that Ukraine supports a call for a ceasefire during the Winter Olympics. This follows an initiative by Italy and the Pope, who urged world leaders to use the Olympic Games to promote peace. According to him, Ukraine supports the initiative for a ceasefire during the Winter Olympics, taking place from February 6 to 22nd, as well as the relevant United Nations resolution calling for a global ceasefire. He added that Russia needs to clarify its proposition on this matter.
We support this appeal. We are interested in a ceasefire, and if Russia once again rejects, it will once again confirm who is the obstacle for peace and who wants to continue this war.
Earlier, Pope Leo XIV called on all countries engaged in armed conflict to declare an Olympic ceasefire during the 2026 Winter Olympics in Italy, which opened on February 6. The call for an Olympic ceasefire was also supported by Italian President Sergio Mattarella. While the United States and the international community propose the steps toward de-escalation, Russia has again struck energy infrastructure in Ukraine. Over 400 drones and around 40 missiles of various types were used in a massive nighttime attack on February 7th. The main targets were power grids, generation facilities, and distribution substations. As a result, damage was reported in Volyn, Ivano-Frankivsk, Lviv, and Rivne regions, and a multi-story building in Rivne was hit. In Vinnytsia region, drones struck the administrative building of an agriculture college. Strikes were also reported in Kyiv and Kharkiv regions. President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Saturday that Russia chooses new attacks instead of diplomacy, and he expects a response from all supporting the tripartite peace negotiations.
Every day, Russia could choose real diplomacy, but it chooses new strikes. It is crucial that everyone who supports the trilateral negotiations respond to this. Moscow must be deprived of the ability to use the cold as leverage against Ukraine. This requires missiles for Patriot, NASAMS, and other systems. Every shipment helps us get through this winter. I thank all our partners who understand this and are genuinely helping.
Despite a deadlock on territorial issues in the negotiations and ongoing Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities, US President Donald Trump praised the progress in peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. He made this assessment on Friday immediately after the conclusion of the Abu Dhabi talks. However, he did not provide any specific details.
We had very, very good talks today having to do with Russia, Ukraine. Something could be happening.
Meanwhile, the United States and Russia are preparing an economic agreement between the two countries worth around $12 trillion. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reported this, citing intelligence briefings that introduced him to the so-called Dmitriev package, which proposed economic cooperation between Russia and the US. According to him, media reports suggest that some of these documents may also contain issues related to Ukraine. Zelensky emphasized that the Ukrainian delegation conveyed the president's position. If any bilateral agreements between Russia and the US are made, any points considering Ukraine cannot contradict the constitutional laws of Ukraine and should not be discussed without Ukraine. He added that Ukraine will respond if necessary.
Another Russian general is targeted in assassination attempt. The attack comes amid a deadly pattern of bombing and shootings that have already killed several senior Russian figures. Now, newly released US files are reopening dark questions about Jeffrey Epstein, foreign intelligence, and whether global allies were secretly compromised. Russian Lieutenant General Volodymyr Alexeyev, a high-ranking official in Russia's military intelligence agency, was shot multiple times in Moscow, Russian authorities said today. He was taken to hospital and he is reported to be in serious condition. Investigators said the attacker fled the scene. No group has claimed responsibility. Russians are treating the incident as an assassination attempt. Reuters, Sky News, reported that Alexeyev is alive and there has been no official confirmation of his death, while today's incident did not result in a confirmed death yet. Several Russian generals have been killed in Moscow in recent years, according to widely reported cases. In December 2025, Lieutenant General Fonil Servarov died after a bomb planted under his car exploded in southern Moscow. In December 2024, Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, commander of Russian chemical and biological forces, was killed by explosive device outside his apartment building in Moscow. In April 2025, Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moskalik was killed when a bomb detonated near his home in Balashikha, a city outside Moscow. Russian authorities opened criminal investigations. Officials have suggested possible Ukrainian involvement, but no public evidence or official confirmation from Ukraine has been released. Since the start of Russia's war in Ukraine, there has been a series of targeted attacks on senior Russian military officers inside Russia. The incidents have raised concerns about security in Moscow and have drawn international attention. Meanwhile, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said his government will investigate whether Jeffrey Epstein may have had connection to Russian intelligence services. The comments came after release of US investigation documents related to Epstein. Tusk said material has raised questions in public about whether parts of Epstein's operation may have been used to collect compromising information on influential people. He stressed that the issue is still at an early stage and that no conclusion have been reached. According to Tusk, Polish authorities will form a special team to review the documents and determine whether they contain anything relevant to Poland. This includes checking whether any Polish citizens or institutions appear in the files. The documents were released by US authorities as part of an ongoing legal and investigative process connected to Epstein's past activities. Files mention Russia and Russian individuals in several places, but they do not contain direct proof that Epstein worked for Russian intelligence. Security analysts know that Epstein had a wide international network that included wealthy individuals, academics, politicians, and business figures from many nations. The presence of Russian names or references in the files does not by itself establish direct connection. Russian officials rejected this. Kremlin says there is no evidence that Epstein had any ties to Russian intelligence. Also, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said the allegations were not serious and did not warrant a detailed response. Jeffrey Epstein was a wealthy US financier who became subject of criminal investigation for sex trafficking and sexual abuse of minors. He was arrested in 2011 and on federal charges, but died later that year in New York jail while awaiting trial. His death was ruled as suicide. Since his death, Epstein's activities and contacts have continued to draw attention from journalists, lawmakers, and investigators. The latest document released have renewed scrutiny of how his network operated and whether it may have been exploited by intelligence. So far, no Western intelligence agency has publicly confirmed that Epstein worked for Russia or any other foreign intel. Officials say any claims remain unproven and should be treated with caution until formal investigations are completed. However, former MI6 spy says Jeffrey Epstein was recruited by Russian intelligence and likely had compromising material on Trump. Former British intel officer Christopher Steele says it's quite likely Epstein was recruited by Russians and that Epstein, along with Russian handlers, had compromising material on President Trump. The claims have not been proven and have not been confirmed by US authorities. Christopher Steele, a former MI6 officer who once headed the agency's Russia desk, made the comments in a radio interview following the release of new Epstein files related to Epstein activities. Steele says the documents show links between Epstein network and Russia and raise long-standing questions about the source of Epstein's wealth. He said US sources had long believed Epstein's money didn't really stack up and did not appear to come from normal business activity. According to Steele, Epstein may have been recruited by Russian organized criminals and later handled by individuals connected to Russian intelligence. He said he believes Epstein and the Russians who were handling him were likely involved in collecting compromat, a Russian term used to describe compromising material gathered on powerful individuals. Steele said he believes it is quite likely that such material existed on Trump, adding that some files may not longer exist. He also referred to earlier reports that alleged Russia possessing compromising information about Trump. Steele is best known in the US for compiling a controversial dossier during the 2016 presidential campaigns that included claims about Russian interference and ties between Trump and Russians. Many elements of the document were never verified and became a major source of political debate. There is no public evidence confirming that Epstein worked for Russian intel or that compromise exists. Russian officials have denied any connection between Epstein and Russian intel, and US intelligence agencies have not supported the claims. Epstein, a wealthy financier, died in federal custody in 2019 while awaiting trial. Years after his death, newly released documents continue to generate renewed scrutiny of his finances and the possibility that his network was exploited. The Steele dossier was a set of documents compiled in 2016 by Christopher Steele, a former British intel officer. The work was produced as opposition research on then presidential candidate Trump and his connections to Russia. Steele described it as a raw intel, not verified facts, but information that required further investigation. The Steele dossier obtained several broad themes, including allegation of contacts between Trump and Russians, claims that Russia had compromising information on President Trump that could be used as leverage. Meanwhile, documents and communications between Mandelson and Epstein were released. Emails and correspondence linking Mandelson to Jeffrey Epstein, including messages showing Mandelson maintained contact after Epstein's conviction. Some documents appear to show Mandelson sharing confidential or sensitive information with Epstein or discussing topics that raised questions. Mandelson resigned from the Labour Party and quit the House of Lords following fallout from the files. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer publicly apologized to Epstein survivors for appointing Mandelson as ambassador despite known ties to Epstein, calling the decision a serious lapse in judgment. That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and glory to Ukraine.